Hello friends, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink. Welcome back to another video for my 2020 Christmas card series. And for today's cards, I wanted to play with distress inks. So I have my non-stick craft sheet here, and this time I'm working with Distress HEAVYSTOCK, which I bought a bunch of it quite some time ago after watching one of Tim Holtz live videos. I'm not even exactly sure. I think it was one of the ones to do with like the sprays and whatnot. But you can use HEAVYSTOCK for all sorts of things. And this week's color throwdown challenge was sort of a plum color, mint, and like cream. So that's why I went with the HEAVYSTOCK, because it is definitely got like a cream finish. Usually with, you know, the ink smushing, I reach for distress watercolor paper, which you still totally can. Either one works great. You just get different looks on different types of papers, different types of watercolor papers, you know, that sort of thing. So with these ones, I was kind of experimenting. So because of those were the colors, I started with just distress ink. And I was using antique linen, seedless preserves, and tumbled glass and cracked pistachio because I kind of wanted them to mix together a little bit and get a little more blue into the green. With these colors though, they can go muddy really quickly because you start mixing like purple and green together, and then you add in the antique linen, and you just got to watch what you're doing. So I did my typical, you know, smushing the inks onto the mat. That one part, and I'll end up doing it again, like running my fingers through it. That's another little trick I picked up from one of Tim's more recent videos. If you don't like getting ink on your fingers, just wear gloves. It just kind of breaks up, you know, where you've placed the inks, you know, and mixes them up a little bit. I don't mind getting ink on my hands because the amount of times I wash my hands in a day, plus hand sanitizer, you know, all that stuff, it just comes right off. Like, it's all water-based. Like, it comes off. But anyway, I started with the distress inks on this piece, and then I went in and started using Oxide and just kept layering. I was just having fun with it. Like I said, though, it can go muddy quickly, but I was, you know, paying attention to where things were going, and if it started turning too muddy, that's when I decided it's like, okay, I'm not going to add like many more layers to this because it's just going to go nuts. So the last thing I did here was I added a bit of the Seedless Preserves Oxide, very lightly. I didn't use up all that was on the mat there because it's going to take over everything. And then here again, I kind of, you know, I smushed the ink, sprayed the water, and then ran my fingers through it. So it ended up being much more scattered splotches of ink, which is kind of fun. These are the sorts of things, like, you know, if you've got the time, just sit down and just make backgrounds. They're fun. And honestly, when I did both of these, I wasn't 100% sure what I was going to do with them. Like, I had 10 different ideas going on in my head for the finished cards. I was going to die cut them. I was going to do this. I was going to use them as backgrounds. Like, I just really didn't know where I was going. I was just having fun. So I did the one, and I had the time, so I was like, you know, I'm going to do a second one, and I'm going to just do it slightly different. So with this one, I started with just the tumbled glass and cracked pistachio distress inks. So just kind of give me a base, basically, of that, you know, kind of minty blue green color. And in between each layer, I'm just using my embossing gun to dry everything. That's where you get that fun, splattery, you know, layered effect. So I started with that. So I've got just these, you know, splatters and layers of that blue and the green. And then I'm going to start going in and adding more colors. And because just depending on the intensities of the colors you use, like Seedless Preserves is a very intense color. It's a very deep, rich plum color. So it will easily overwhelm everything. So it just kind of depends on what colors you're going with. So I went in with more distress inks on this one. This one I kept more to just distress ink. I was kind of curious, like, rather than do the mix like of distress inks and oxides like I did on the first piece, this one I kept almost only distress inks. I'm only gonna add a tiny, I couldn't stop myself. I'm only gonna add a tiny little bit of the oxide, you know, in a minute here. But again, just kind of kept adding layers and pressing into the splatter and what's left on my craft mat here. And always, if it starts getting muddy or just starts looking gross, you just wipe it up, go on to, you know, fresh ink or whatever, or another background, do whatever you want to do. So added my splatters, and I could see it was starting to turn a bit muddy here and there. So it's like, okay, I'm going to wipe this up. And then This is where I'm just going to just a bit of splatter using the cracked pistachio oxide ink mixed with water, and I'm just splattering it on with a paintbrush just to kind of bring in more of that sort of minty color. And I decided to add it to the first background as well, because why not? The oxides layer kind of more on top of everything. They sit a little more on top. So after I'd added those, this is a little trick I picked up. I forget. I think it might have been another Tim Holtz video. It might have been. I forget who had mentioned this, but when you have like watercolor backgrounds and that sort of thing that are really warped, if you run them through either a laminator, or here I'm running them through my Mink machine, it flattens them out perfectly. You can do this too if you put them between some like copy paper and run it through your die cut machine without any dies. That'll flatten it as well. Those sorts of things. But I really like using the Mink for this because it takes no time at all and it flattens them out really well. So these backgrounds were completely dry, but even then, the heat still, like, they weren't 100% dry. So a bit of the ink transferred to the inside of the little carrier sheet folder, but I just wiped that off. And I didn't need to have this piece of cardstock inside the folder. Like, you can run things through with just whatever it is and foil, etc. and that clear carrier sheet. But I've been putting cardstock in mine just to give it that little extra stability. So did that with both of these, and it also helped not only to completely flatten them perfectly, but it also made sure everything was dry. So I was okay with the little bit of transfer onto the sheet. And I did this before I do any embossing. If you have embossing, if I had white heat embossed these first and then ran them through the Mink, it would have reheated and melted all that embossing, and then the melted embossing would have stuck to the transfer sheet, aka you would have a hot mess. So yeah, I ran them through with nothing on them other than the ink. So once they're flat, this is another reason why I flatten them, because usually I don't do this. I've never shown this in videos before. Usually I don't bother flattening them out because it's like, oh, I'm going to heat emboss, and then when I adhere them to the card, that flattens them out. It's fine. But when they were so warped, it's nice when they're flat like this because it just makes it easier to stamp on, and that's what I ended up deciding to do rather than die cut. I lined up a bunch of the stamps from the Simon Says Stamp Prismatic Snowflake stamp set. And I used my Misty to do this so I could just stamp them all at once. I used my anti-static powder tool heavily on this background. Wiped off the excess, or brushed off the excess with my big fan brush. And then stamped all those images with clear embossing ink. That little white tool there off on the right, it's just a whiteboard eraser, so it has felt on the bottom of it. I am really loving this for applying pressure to my Misty lid. It takes a lot of the pressure off my fingers that, because usually you walk your fingers on it, you press with your hands a lot. And I'm just finding, and I mentioned this in another video, I'm just finding the older I get, and especially like wintertime and stuff, my hands start to hurt. So having this little whiteboard eraser has been wonderful. So I did that with both backgrounds. Anti-static powder, brush off the excess, stamp all of these snowflakes with the clear embossing ink, and then I covered them all with Simon's Detail White embossing powder. And then, of course, I'm going to add more splatter because it's Christmas cards, and I told you guys, like, no one can stop me. Like, you guys will be prying the white picket fence paint out of my cold dead fingers, sort of a thing. Like, I use splatter all the time anyway, but Christmas cards, they're all getting splattered, basically. So pulled out a bunch of white paint, and I stuck it on just the edge of one of my plastic palettes here, and I heavily splattered this background with it. And honestly, I'm really glad I did. It kind of just pulled it all together a little bit more. Like, I knew they're busy backgrounds. You got the ink splatters and layers of the colors and then the snowflakes, but the white splatters really just kind of brought it up to that. Just, I don't know. I really love the addition of the white splatters to it. So I literally just splattered the heck out of them and then set them aside to completely dry. And then another thing I wanted to do, because for some reason, and I probably do, and I'll probably find it again after this video, I thought I had some plum colored like glitter cardstock, but I couldn't find it. So rather than continue to drive myself nuts, I just took another piece of that Distress Heavy Stock, and I sprayed it with some glitter spray. And this is the Amethyst Shimmer Sparkle Spray from Tonic. I showed one of the other ones in that Rustic Rose haul I did a few weeks ago. But yeah, really deep plum color, and the shimmer, it's very pretty. So I sprayed that piece of HEAVYSTOCK with that. Again, let it completely dry. I wiped off the nozzle of the spray really well with a wipe just to keep that as clean as possible, because any type of like sparkle spray, they can get really clogged. I haven't had any problems so far with them, but I always keep the nozzles wiped off as soon as I'm done using it. So after they'd completely dried, I die cut them using the CZ Design Joy Script wafer dies. And I die cut 2 more layers from some plum cardstock to kind of stack behind it. So I'm going to stack all these together with the sparkly piece on the very top. And then I die cut the outline just from some vellum. And I'm adhering all that together with craft tacky glue. And then adhering that to the vellum outline layer. And then off camera, I'd also die cut some mint cardstock using the SOPHIE Snowflake, which I used in my last video. Or the one before. The one before the last. It was in the series. Anyway, it was still sitting on my desk and I was like, ooh, I'm just going to add that to bring in a little more of the mint to this card. And then since I had my mink out, I was going to do some foiling. So I have the reverse Christmas sentiment strips, which can be foiled. I've shown this in many videos. This is one of my foiling successes. Still, you know, playing around here and there with foiling of the things, but this one with the reverse sentiment strips from Simon's The Stamp, I've been foiling them with success, so I'm quite happy with that. So I have just a full sheet of that, and I have some gold deco foil, and I'm just using my little Spellbinders quick trimmer here. I am quite liking this. It just makes it so much easier. It's funny how finicky foil can be just to cut it, because it's so thin, you know? So this little tool is just perfect. So I just lined it up, saw where I wanted to cut, and then I just used the little cutting tool that comes with it and cuts a nice little straight line right down there, and I'm done. That's it. So once I've got my piece of foil, I can run this through the mink. And so far I've just been using the hottest heat setting. It just seems to work. And again, I still have that piece of cardstock inside the little clear folder that you run it through with. I'm not even sure if it's 100% necessary. It gives me comfort. It's kind of almost like a seatbelt. It's like I feel more comfortable with that, you know, extra piece of cardstock in there. So I don't know, but I have that. I have the sentiment strips face up, so like the black wording and everything face up, and then the nice foil face up as well. And run this through the mink machine, and that will fuse the foil to all of the black areas. Which, when it first comes out like this, it just looks like a solid piece, and it's like this didn't work. But then you peel off the foil and you're left with all those sentiments, and it's such a satisfying thing. It's the same as like when you're melting, you know, embossing powder. It's just that feeling of satisfaction. I just love it. So peeled that off. I trimmed off the sentiments I wanted. All the extra pieces I'm putting just back in the pack with all the other ones. Since I did gold, that's why I did the entire sheet, because I'm like, when will I not use gold, really? So it was just easier, and I'm like, next time I need sentiments, I'll have a bunch of already foiled ones and they'll be good to go. So trim down the ones I wanted to complete the sentiment on the front, plus I trimmed down more to put on the inside of the card as well, and then put all the excess with the package. And then my card bases are just some Simon's The Stamp cream, like off-white cardstock. And I have a bunch of the snowflakes from the Prismatic snowflake set, just on acrylic blocks. And I'm stamping them with those same Oxide inks. So I'm using the cracked pistachio, the antique linen, and the seedless preserves Oxide inks to stamp these snowflakes on the insides of the cards. And off camera, I ended up stamping the envelopes as well, because I had the inks out, I had the stamps out. It's like, why not? And I've said this before too, I would rather do it when I have everything out, because I'm not going to do it later. So I used some cream envelopes, and I'll show the envelopes at the end, but I did the exact same thing. I just stamped the same snowflakes with those inks just to make everything all matchy. And then to assemble all my cards, I die cut the backgrounds to be slightly smaller than an A2 card front. And then I added a larger matting layer with that same plum cardstock that I used earlier. And then I'm going to add my little mint snowflake. And then I pulled out some gold thread. I haven't done this in a while, but I have all these metallic threads here. And I wanted to add a couple little more elements to pull in that gold foil I used on the sentiments. So I wrap that gold thread around my fingers till you get a nice messy little, you know, circular nest basically of thread. And then I use the tiniest piece of 1/8 inch score tape to adhere kind of right down the center of that nest of thread. And then the joy sentiment, I put the craft tacky glue right behind the actual die cut word and adhered that on top. And then I adhered my little foiled sentiment. I did that to both card fronts, and then those card fronts are going to get adhered to the card bases again with craft tacky glue. And I think I mentioned this earlier, but they're top folding A2 size cards. So once I got those adhered, my last little bit of gold and bling to tie it all together, some Studio Caudia gold foil pearls, just a couple, like 5 of them on each card. That's it. I didn't go nuts with them like I normally do because, again, these cards are busy and there's glitter and there's shimmer and layers and splatter and all the stuff I love. Honestly, like, my inner magpie is always very happy making these cards. This was a very fun time. And then here's the envelopes that I mentioned that I stamped. So they got their matching little envelopes. Everything's good to go. So as always, I turned on the flashlight on my phone to try and show the sparkle. It's hard to capture. Like, the times I don't want my camera to focus, because when it's out of focus, you can actually see the sparkle better. It actually does. So anyway, as always, I will have a link below the video to my blog post. I will have a supply list. I'll link to all the supplies I used. I will also link to the color throwdown challenge in my blog post. You just got to visit the very first link directly below the video. All the info will be there. And yeah, if you want to check it out, check out the description box. Thank you all so much for watching, for subscribing, thumbs upping, commenting, all of it. I really appreciate you all. And I will see you all very soon in another video. Bye.